Smiely Khurana is an independent photographer, videographer, podcaster, and film producer with an emphasis on sustainable production. She's been named Real Green Ambassador by Creative BC and has worked on bringing sustainable methods into higher ed classrooms and onto film sets. Smiley's currently working with Netflix, overseeing sustainability on a TV production. Her blog posts and podcasts are compiled as The Sustainable Act with Smiely Khurana, featuring inspiring guests from all walks of life sharing their stories and ideas about how to break through barriers and inspire change. And thank you so much for taking the time today, Smiely.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about this Real Green Ambassador with Creative BC. What's that about?
Yeah, Creative BC is basically an industry catalyst of all the creative sectors. And here in British Columbia, like I'm sure you know, we have a large sector of like entertainment, digital media, film production. So yeah, Creative BC just kind of helps oversee all aspects. And what Real Green is, it's a chapter of Creative BC, and it's all about sustainability, primarily in the film production, but you know, it could go across to any workplace. And so with Real Green, they offer resources, tips, workshops, meetings in the community to talk with other folks working in the industry and how we can bring sustainability forward. And as an ambassador, I'm just involved in the community, and I'm, you know, engaging in the meetings and discussions, and then applying that to my productions and my workplace, and kind of like following up with that. So I do a lot of, it's cool just getting involved in the community, chatting with other producers and industry professionals. And, you know, I think sustainability is super important. It's just not made aware of a lot. Not a lot of people know how to help or how to get involved. And so as an ambassador, I kind of help pass the message on and offer my own like tips and resources. Yeah.
So for people maybe are wondering, what is sustainability? What does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, so sustainability, I think at a whole, it means our world, right? Like I don't think there is one thing. We're trying to go sustainable to preserve the planet, but also the people that reside on the planet. So for me, it means fighting for the people, the planet, the animals, and sustaining a longer, healthier life for generations to come. So ultimately, sustainability is thinking about the future while meeting today's, you know, expectations.
So what kind of things can people, like, let's say indie producers, start with sort of small scale productions, and I think you've got a blog or a video about being sustainable on a low income budget, small production. So what are some simple things that film producers, videographers can do to start thinking about to be sustainable?
Yeah, and like the funny thing about that is, another myth, I guess you can say, is people assume going sustainable costs more money, right? Because they think they need more fancier equipment or like the nice dishes and like purchasing more. But it's the opposite of that. It's like, how can we reduce what we're consuming and what we're using? And so it's actually a lot more easier, I find, coming from an indie background, to implement sustainable practices on set, because you're saving money rather than spending money. So the first thing I always tell everybody that I think anyone can do now in our day and age is going paperless. And that's the easiest thing to replace, because everybody has access to an email and some sort of device, whether it's a computer or a phone, to be able to access documents, to email and communication. I think paper needs to go. It's just kind of useless. We use it one time and then we toss it out. So that's the first simplest way to go sustainable that doesn't cost you anything. And it actually saves you money from ink, from printing, from paper. And, you know, other things I recommend to people is like encouraging reusable items. I know going forward, it's going to be a little trickier bringing these kind of like reusable items into certain workplaces, but you on your own part, just, you know, try not to buy packaged items and like if you're going to get takeout, you know, use your own cup. Just little swaps that you can do that, you know, don't require waste. So that's another thing. And the third, I think, easiest thing that we can do is if you do have waste, creating a proper waste system on your sets in your homes. So having compost bin, having recycling bins along with garbage. I think another thing I noticed with indie productions, because they're smaller budgets, smaller crews, and people don't really realize, like when they just put a garbage bin out, everything is going into that garbage bin. But just bringing a recycling bin and compost bin on set, even if it's not a bin, it's a compost bag, which is what I did on productions with small budgets. It encourages people to think about where they're putting their waste and reduces your garbage and bags going into the landfill. So yeah, those are, I think, the simplest things that anyone can introduce on smaller budget film productions. And of course, the higher the budget, the more fancier you can get with going more sustainable, like, you know, looking at your energy use, looking at fuel use, even like materials you're using. And the materials you can also, another goal you can bring on smaller budget, which also saves you money, is looking into secondhand items and then donating items. So trying to utilize that rather than purchasing new. So you're not only saving money, but you're reusing and creating like a longer life for items like set design, props, etc. Yeah.
I wonder, maybe does Creative BC have sort of a central hub for exchange? You know, is there a Facebook page or somewhere where people can post, hey, I've used this equipment, this sound boom, and I'm not using it anymore, or whatever, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there is. So it's actually its own company, but Creative BC promotes them quite a bit. So Keep It Green Recycling is a recycling company. They work with productions, businesses, corporate events to make sure that you're recycling. Like they offer bins, so you can recycle soft plastic, styrofoam, etc. that you can't on like curbside pickup recycling. And then they have another chapter called Keep It Green Lockup, I think, the sustainable lockup. And that is like a warehouse where you can drop off your items that you don't like no longer need. And if it's like a bigger scale production, there is a fee to drop off items. But you know, if you're gonna go take that to the landfill, you're gonna also have to pay a fee to toss out your garbage as well. So it's like not much different, but then anyone in the community, whether you work in film or you have an event or you're just like somebody looking for secondhand items, can go into this warehouse and you can take anything for free. Like everything is free, so you're not paying anything. And it's so cool because I know the owner, Kelsey Evans, who created this like a while back, and it's booming. It's becoming more and more popular. And I found, like, talking to different departments in productions, you know, most times they throw everything into the landfill, not because they don't care, it's because they just didn't know that there was a service in place to drop off these big set materials, like things you wouldn't take to a thrift store that film productions use. So we do have a warehouse, a general one in Vancouver here, and anyone can go there. So it's like not just specifically film people.
That's awesome. And I know there's a theater here that has a big costume room where people can go. I know people go like around Halloween and you can rent all kinds of costumes. Like it's a huge closet of like a whole room full of costumes. Is there something like that in Vancouver too?
Yeah, there are a few different, like, so costumes isn't my primary, like, expertise, I would say, like, background, but we do have, like, locations like that for costumes, for props, even, like, prop houses that people can go to and rent costumes out. And this is, like, it kind of depends on the production itself, whether or not productions can go to those, because sometimes they need specific props or costumes that are unique to their show, which is then they start designing new. But I have heard good things about, I can't think of any names on the spot, but I'm sure, like, if you Google it, there's a list of costume houses and prop houses that you can go to and see if you can rent it. And I think that's another thing that's better for smaller productions, smaller budgets, because this is mostly like a cheaper option too, rather than purchasing a new item. And then, you know, what are you going to do with it once you're done your production? So you can just take it back, which is a lot more sustainable than figuring out, okay, like how do I dispose of this item? Yeah.
Right, right. And then, you know, I'm wondering, considering that, you know, we know that 75% of infectious diseases are transmitted through the way that we treat animals, the exploitation of animals, and like SARS and MERS and swine flu and bird flu and COVID now. And considering the impact of animal agriculture on the environment, the air quality, the water quality, do you encourage or do you consider, you know, food options is included in the sustainable practices model?
Yeah, 100%. Like I think definitely cutting out meat, especially red meat, and beef, is definitely helpful towards the environment. You reduce the carbon emissions because of the greenhouse gases that are produced as well as diseases. Like that's another thing that I probably can't talk too much about because I don't know too much about the transmitting of these diseases and the science behind it and like how to avoid it specifically. It's something I'll look into. But in terms of like reducing carbon emissions, being safer and cleaner, definitely reducing your meat intake and looking into more plant-based proteins. And yeah, I like, even I'm plant-based myself. That's something I take pride in, is eating food that comes out of the soil and not like from another animal. It definitely has all its benefits and does justice to our environment as well. Because like with like, you know, producing meat, we're not only talking about like the greenhouse, the gas, as well as like the factories that they're made in, but also the agriculture that we're using to herd like cows and pigs and like all these other animals, and how forests are being taken down to produce more land for these animals, and then the water used, you know, for like their food, and then once like after like in the slaughterhouse, like it's just all this stuff. So reducing your meat, I think there's a study done that if like you reduce your meat to once being vegetarian once a week, you can reduce your carbon emissions by 8% in a year. I think that's a, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge makes a huge difference, I think, on the planet and on our
Mm-hmm.
health, and for the animals, of course, too. And then now they're finding that, you know, all these workers inside the chicken factories, the slaughterhouses are they're maybe they're masked, but they're working really closely
Yeah.
together, and they sweat, and then the sweat droplets fall into the meat
Mm-hmm.
production, and then it's possible that COVID gets on the packaging, so people are taking home packages of meat that maybe contain COVID, and it goes into the fridge or the freezer where it can stay alive, they're
Mm-hmm.
finding. And so now you could take your package of meat out of the freezer a year later and re-release the virus. So it's, yeah, and as you mentioned, all the rainforest and all the land that's used to grow food
Mm-hmm.
for all these animals, when we could just be feeding people the food itself, right, the plant protein. So yeah, I think that's a really part of it. Have you seen the documentary called Cowspiracy?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's on
Yeah.
Netflix. Yeah, it's really good. It's a few years old now, but it's some young filmmakers in California, and they're looking at this guy's just really like, how can I make a difference for the environment? And then he
Mm-hmm.
starts uncovering all of this, and it's really quite revealing and really well done. So speaking of Netflix, you're involved with something in Netflix world. What
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us about that project?
Yeah, so I'm actually overseeing sustainability on a local production here, and with that, it's really cool because again, the culture is shifting. I'm really lucky and glad that I'm getting to work with such a great company that's very forward and accepting of like these new practices. Netflix is very new, the studio, and so obviously like bringing sustainability into the picture came a little later than other studios, but with that comes just changing the culture around the world when it comes to sustainable practices on set, because shockingly, the film industry is the second largest waste contributor in the world, next to the aerospace industry. And it's because it goes way beyond just like using scripts and single use items, but like the carbon emissions produced through fuel, through lumber, through fuel is the highest. Even like the smoke use, like with the visual effects and like all those action movies we watch, like everything that's happening there, the explosions, like all that is going into our air. And and then after a set wraps and production is done and everything is taken down, it's most likely going into landfill. Now it's like things are starting to change. People are starting to realize that it's not really sustainable for our planet. Like we shouldn't be, and that's something I truly believe in, is that we shouldn't be compromising our planet, the place we live, and the people that live here for the sake of a 1.5 hour piece of entertainment. And so, Netflix has introduced sustainability. There's a lot more studios that also are now like taking sustainability more important. So yeah, my work with them is just like overseeing the production, advising department heads on what they can do in their departments, like the construction department, and kind of reevaluating where they're getting their lumber from. And it's really cool because the set I work on, they're reusing a lot of pieces. I work on the second season of a show, so they took a lot of pieces from the first season that would have ended up in landfill and created a new like set, like one piece of set with all like recycled materials, as well as their costume department. They're reevaluating where they're sourcing their clothing from, textile recycling, because again, another thing that a lot of people don't do is recycle their textiles, which you can do. You just have to find the right recycling vendor. So they're taking that more seriously. And then even the products they use to clean their clothing, so what kind of chemicals are in these clean products or at the dry cleaner. So little things like each department, what they're doing to go more green. And another thing like transportation that anyone can do is not idle. So do not leave your vehicle on if you don't need to use it for more than 30 seconds. You're saving fuel, you're saving energy. So it's really cool, like getting to work with them and just helping. I'm just kind of more of like a helping hand. Everything, it needs to come from within, whether people implement these practices or not. As a younger person, like coming into the industry, for me, it's a lot easier to adapt to these new changes because I haven't been like prone to one habit for like 30-40 years. So the challenges with that comes with working with people that have been in the industry for 30 plus years and have been doing something one way, and how can I work with them to ease into and transition into a newer method that isn't, too stressful to learn, and it's like helpful and beneficial for both them and the planet. So that's basically what I do.
Well, that's a challenge. And so, but you're trained as in film, right? You went to college for film school. And so is this primarily what you're doing now? Is this Green Ambassador, or are you finding time still to do film production?
Yeah, so I work in film production and I'm recently just getting into the sustainability aspect. I definitely want to bring the two together soon, right? Like I'm just getting started in the industry. I just finished school last year, where I learned the essentials of filmmaking. Sustainability came after I attended this event during my time in school, where I learned about the facts of how wasteful our industry is. And then something sparked in me because as a newcomer to the industry, I felt a sense of responsibility to tackle this issue, and something we weren't talking about in school and in our classrooms, and it's never come up. And so in school, I decided, how can I bring sustainability into my film production? So I produce films. As a producer, you're overseeing everything, you're managing the whole crew and bringing the story to life. And that's when I first brought sustainability onto our set, and kind of went against a few practices that we were taught in school, like such as printing all our documents, our scripts, and just like different little things that, you know, we were taught because again, our instructors were teaching us how things were in the industry for the last like 100 years. So kind of went against those and decided, how can I be a more sustainable producer, and brought my whole crew of like 30 people on board. And people realized it wasn't that hard at all to be green, and you feel good. Like at the end of the show, when you realize because of your contribution, you saved so you know, so many of like one thing like paper or plastic. And after that, after I left school, I started doing more work in the industry, and then I got this job opportunity with Netflix to oversee sustainability, which has been my first time really bringing the two together. And I think down the road, my goal is still to keep producing films, but make sustainability at its core. So it's not like, oh, this extra thing, but this is the main value. This is like the new norm. So yeah, my work is primarily film production, and then introducing sustainability into the picture, I would say.
That's a great way to move forward. I think that's wonderful. And the film industry is doing quite well in BC, and I've heard that it's going to continue that way and perhaps even grow. Do you know what's happening? I know there was going to be a concerted effort to make kind of BC the new Hollywood North sort of thing or something like that. Is that happening?
Yeah, no, I think it's already considered Hollywood North, simply because there's so many factors as to why productions come up here to film. We have everything, especially in Vancouver. We have the ocean, we have nature, but we also have the city. That makes it like a prime like location to come shoot at because it's so versatile. Also costs, I know, like from the producer point of view, it's a lot cheaper to film here than it is in the States, or some areas in the States, I would say. So there are a lot of factors as to why Vancouver is a popular place to come to film. And in terms of like going forward with the new like COVID reality, you know, again, BC is doing a lot better than other areas in North America, which is making it a more popular choice for productions to come here because work can start sooner here in BC. I know Canadian productions, domestic productions are, I think, already have the green light to start work again. There are some, because a lot of our productions, our shows come from down south. So until the borders reopen and then the quarantine takes place, we can't really start work. But I think what people are saying, the industry, you know, where we don't have to fear like not having work in the future just because of our situation.
And it's kind of it's a huge industry, right? Like there's so many components to whether you're a writer or a promoter or a sound tech, or you make costumes or set design. Like there's lots of opportunities for employment in there, it seems
Mm-hmm.
like.
Yeah, definitely. There's all aspects. So like whether you work in the prep stages, which is the writing stages, developing, producing, you know, or the post-production, which is, because those can be done remotely. So, you know, that is already been, I know, in the works. People already have been working. So there are writing rooms, as well as post-production. So editing, it can all be done right now because you can isolate and work. In terms of production, like working on set, yeah, because there's a need for every single role to be filled, and there's never a shortage of work, I would say. I don't want to jinx it, but it seems very promising for the future, especially because BC is doing really well, that we're expecting to have more work in the future. But yeah, like the last few months have been a little difficult because BC's film industry employs at like thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, right? And so a lot of people were out of work for the last few months. But I think that's why we can stay positive because, yeah, there's work coming and a lot of it.
Right, and those months of sacrifice have certainly paid off. So we're in a situation now where we can kind of safely reopen. And I guess that's the challenge then, especially for on set, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, like as you mentioned, the people coming from the US, they will have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Is that what the government is saying? And then,
Yeah, that's the government rule. Once the border reopens, so I think they're saying end of July,
uh,
and any.
Yeah, I think they've extended that for regular travelers, but maybe within the industry, are they saying end of July?
Yeah,
Oh,
for the industry, they're saying end of July, but also like we don't know yet because they said end of June, and so productions began to plan to start shooting like mid-July, but you know, a week later, a week after we got greenlit to start film production, the border closure extended, which meant we had to postpone our plans. So it all depends. We're hoping to start work in August because if borders open and everyone quarantines and everyone's getting tested, there's a lot of new things like being introduced, you know, coming to work into the workplace. Like you've got to get tested and keep your distance from people. We're not bringing on any new people on set. Like, so like, I think that's another challenge for a lot of productions is rewriting stories now to, you know, limit content between actors, bringing on those background actors, like as often we see in scenes with like, it's all the extras. So limiting those. So a lot of rewrites to just keep everybody safe. And that's probably going to be the new norm as well, you know, like going forward, that's what we see on our screen. So yeah, it's definitely like we're keeping positive, but we never know because it depends on what happens, you know, in the States as well. If they're not allowed to come over, we have to wait longer, and that's just the reality.
yeah. Yeah, let's hope they get their act together and soon. It's pretty scary what's happening there. So I haven't been on a film set, but I'm imagining then, from the actor's perspective, and like you say, the extras, it's a challenge definitely to, keep them apart, and that'll have to all be rewritten. From the crew perspective, is it fairly easy to maintain a distance?
So for the most part, there could be like new ways of like new protocols, and there will be to make sure that you're keeping distance from other crew members. Like I already know, like if you aren't required to be on set, like you're not going to be allowed to go on set. So things like that. In terms of positions that just simply can't socially distance because it's just the nature of their job, their work. It's very department specific, and I think the government was saying here and the film commission in BC that, you know, they've considered that, they've thought about that, and we're just going to have to come up with different solutions and get creative. There's nothing in place yet, and I think that's because we're not allowed to go on set yet, and so it's kind of hard to plan some things while you're still like at home working from home. So yeah, I'm curious to see. I don't work primarily on set. I kind of do walkthroughs. So even I'm curious to see what the new reality is going to look like of working on set and how people are going to be keeping their distance. But yeah, I think it's going to be a trial and error and see like what works, what does it. Even like starting the industry again, there's no guarantee it's going to be successful like going forward. People are just keeping their hopes up and seeing what happens. If it's safe, if it isn't, we're going to close down again. But yeah,
Well, hopefully we'll continue being smart about it, and
exactly.
as we have been as British Columbians. So I'm interested to see what they come up with, and what some of the new scripts are, and because
Mm-hmm.
I find it it's kind of weird watching TV right now because I have these reactions. Oh, they're too close together, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be kind of interesting when the screen reality reflects our real reality, and it'll kind of reinforce that behavior, like normalize it as well, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I think about even like in our real life, like before, like how production offices used to look like, or just normal workplaces, and how we would interact with people. And now you look back and you're like, wow, like that wasn't a problem ever. And now you would second doubt, like, you know, doubt yourself every time you get close to somebody or share something like like supply, even office supplies. So all that is changing. And yeah, it's going to be interesting because that is definitely going to reflect on our screens. You know, art and entertainment is most often a reflection of like our society and reality, and you know, sometimes it's something that we see and look up to. And I think like that's another thing as storytellers, it's definitely important to emphasize like aspects like keeping your distance and uh, sanitary, being sanitary, and like taking care of yourself and your health. And you know, if we see that on the screen, people are like often going to look at that and feel inspired to follow the same. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And even the whole mask thing, just wear the freaking mask, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once we see like movie stars doing that, then people might actually take that more seriously as well. That would be good because that
Yes.
protects other people. That shows I care about you. I'm
Mhm.
doing this because I care about you, right? And that's a nice world to live in, I think.
Mhm.
Okay, so speaking of major big things that are changing in our world and that people are having time now to think about, the Black Lives Matter situation has definitely risen to the surface. And I loved the podcast that you did with your little sister where you went to the rally. As a person of color, I'm interested in talking about your perspective working in the industry and just living in BC and what Black Lives Matter means to you and why did you take your sister to that rally and what happened there?
Yeah, of course. I definitely think a large reason that this like kind of blew up this year, like the movement and the protests around the world, is because we were all kind of forced to sit at home, and most people are on their phones and looking at social media and having a lot more time to think about what's happening, because this stuff has been happening for 400 plus years. Like the discrimination against Black people and Indigenous people, it's been happening for years and it's still happening to this day. Yet people just never really, not everyone, I'm not speaking for everyone, but a lot of times people don't look up and pause and reflect on what's happening around them, to their loved ones, to their co-workers, and friends and neighbors. And because of the time we had off, I know myself too, I've had more time to reflect on my actions and what I'm using my platform for. And this has definitely always been important to me. I share my thoughts through my art, my films, but I've never really talked about it openly. I just never felt like that I had that safe space to voice my opinion, because I think that's another thing a lot of people connect with and relate with, is like speaking up is terrifying, especially speaking your opinions because you're worried about the critique. Um, so for me, like ever since this movement like kind of blew up this year, I felt more comfortable in voicing opinions on racial discrimination and equality and how that interconnects with sustainability and the environment, because that's another thing. Environmental racism is a thing, and it's something I realized over the last few years of my involvement in this, in the environmental movement. People I looked up to, environmentalist organizations, were prominently white, and it's something I never thought about before until I realized Black, Indigenous, people of color communities have been voicing these opinions, these thoughts, these reflections, and concerns for generations regarding protecting the environment, protecting the earth. And it's also affecting the BIPOC community more than ever. So BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Simply because of where they're situated, they're most impacted by the climate crisis, like poor air quality and carbon emissions and natural disasters. And so there's a lot that's happening. And the reason I took my sister to the rally is because she's 13, and when I was 13 I had no idea about any of this. Even being a person of color, I hardly knew who I was, what my place in the world is. And we weren't being taught this in schools, where we don't really discuss this kind of issue, or the history of what's happening. And when I would have conversations with her at home, um, I knew like she was coming from a place where she just didn't understand what this movement was. So I took her to this. It was a safe rally. Everyone distanced themselves, and it was very peaceful. And she just listened the whole time. She didn't talk. She just listened to all the speakers that came out and try to understand what this movement is about. And I asked her to reflect on it after, and she told me what inspired her was that it wasn't just Black people that were speaking about this movement. There was people of all colors, all backgrounds, speaking on this issue and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and that, you know, the whole stigma, like the whole all lives matter thing that's been happening, it's like the point isn't that other lives don't matter and only Black lives matter. It's that Black lives should also, like our Black brothers and sisters should also have the same equality and justice as we do. And she reflected on like even her role as a person of color. She says and this is something I realized too, like because like we're able to come and live in this country or like be born here and walk out not in fear because of the fight that our Black and Indigenous brothers and sisters have been fighting for a long time and still do. And so yeah, there's a lot around that I really wanted her to, she's very passionate, like my sisters are already very passionate about issues like this, like racism and sexism, but something she realized was like they're not talking about it in schools, and even if she would bring it up in her classroom, it just wasn't taken in account to like talk about as a discussion in class. So yeah, we talked a little bit about, you know, how the education system needs to start adapting to these new, well, they're not new, but adapting to these practices where they're bringing this into our history books and textbooks and talking about, you know, what's been happening and how we can change and progress as a generation. And if education systems aren't doing that, what can we do in the moment? And that's something I learned from her, you know. I'm like, you're 13, yes, but like what can you do, because you have a voice and, you know, you're able to go out and create change. And yeah, so that's something I talked to her about. It's a thing where it's like, you know, this could be a never-ending discussion, and I think this is important for anyone, doesn't matter what your age is to have those tough conversations and, you know, acknowledge your privilege and see how you can be a better ally, you know, and like what can you do to change and create things that are better for you and the people around you. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think I called her your little sister, and now I'm realizing I should. That's even that word is kind of, you know, not the nicest word perhaps. So let's say younger sister.
I mean,
Younger
she's
sister.
my baby sister. She's
Yeah.
still a baby in my eyes, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay. But yeah, and it occurred to me later in life. You know, I think when I was studying women's studies at university, and then it just kind of shifts the lens a bit, and then I went, oh well, yeah, all the history that I've learned is written by the winners of the battles, and usually the white patriarchal male of the species, right? And so for example, and I mean this is, you know, 400 years maybe on this continent, but I mean millennia. I've just been reading this book that my mother, who passed a number of years ago, but I ended up with this book, and I remember her reading it. It's about the history of England. So my ancestors are British, and so it starts like, you know, after the last ice age, and the land bridge from Europe has broken because the ice has melted, and so suddenly these people are on this island, and they're nomadic, and they're, you know, hunter gatherers. And even that term, if we really look at it, they were probably more gathering than hunting, right? Hunting was a big activity that took place that the men engaged in, but the gathering was something the women do continually with their babies, you know. So even that, and then they move, they shift down to the building of Stonehenge, and then, but you know what, I had to put the book down. I think we're around 500 after the current era now, you know. And it's like the Celtics came, and then the Saxons came, and then the Romans came, and it's just battle after battle and rape and pillage. And finally I just had to like shut this book, because yeah, that was part of the history of England and everywhere else on this planet, unfortunately, I think, you know, the battle for land and resources. But at the same time, it's like, well, what were the women doing during this time? Like there was a whole other thing going on, you know. How did they collect the water, and how did they make the food, and how did they raise the children and dry the herbs and make the medicines? And so your sister is right that we don't study this stuff in school.
Mhm.
And I guess maybe, Howard Zinn wrote the famous People's History, which looks at stories of actual living people. And maybe it's up to us. We have to write those history books. And I think a lot of it is in the way we live our lives, and the things we attend, the rallies, and who we listen to, and what we learn.
Exactly. And I think like, yeah, like reflecting on my own upbringing, like going to school, elementary school to high school to university, that's the same thing. Like the only history lessons we've learned was from a white point of view, regarding like the majority white population, whether that was in England or here, and kind of overseeing, like not really like neglecting the history of like you said, what were the women doing, what were the indigenous people facing, the Black history. And I remember even like being in a history class in film school, like, and it was like world history, and so we're learning about cinema, like the cinematic history in every country around the world. But we spent like half of the term focusing on European film history, and then maybe half a class, maybe 20 minutes on all other minority countries, even which then wasn't doing justice to their history. That's something that I like really, and I didn't speak up because it was just like, I knew it was wrong because I'm paying to be in this class, but we're not learning the full side of some of these history lessons. They're being skipped, and that also comes down to like who's in these positions and these institutions, and in power to bring this into our textbooks and lessons. And why aren't we hiring more BIPOC leaders and teachers, educators, and just people in these roles that can bring change? That's another thing, is that yeah, from our side, our point of view, like trying to learn, but like who are we learning from? And trying to take that in account. And I think from a filmmaker background, even when it comes to telling stories on screen, like we shouldn't have white people telling stories of BIPOC stories and cultures and people, like families. There should be more BIPOC in the writing rooms, in the editing suites. Like we need more point of views if we're talking about these. And also another thing is, don't just hire BIPOC people to talk, like write stories about their culture. Like BIPOC, the community, like everybody, they're talented. Like use the talents and skills to bring another perspective into your story. It does not need to be another story about justice or racism or equality. It could be a normal love story. And like that's another thing that is changing in the industry. I think going forward, a lot of people are now reflecting on their actions. And you look at like who's in these leadership positions and have been for hundreds of years, and it's majority white males, right? And that hire other white males. So yeah, it's like who are in these leadership positions, hire more BIPOC, and that will create more change and start these discussions. Yeah.
Yeah, some of my favorite films are foreign films. Like, I love that Netflix has a whole foreign film section. It's wonderful to. I find sometimes the subtitles are hard, and I wish I spoke other languages. But there's always a different. I don't know. There's something different about different stories from different nations, and they bring their own something
Yeah.
about their culture. Speaking of culture, so talk to me about cultural appropriation. What should white people know about that, and what do we need to be sensitive about?
I think, okay, so definitely coming back to like who's telling the story and who's telling the history lesson. So like really focusing on like who are you bringing to these positions and who are you learning from, right? And so for me, like reflecting on where I was getting my information and education from for the sustainability movement and the environmental movement is now I'm trying to reflect on that and listen to more BIPOC leaders. And when it comes to cultural appropriation, it's really, really important for people to realize first their privilege, and then second, how are they supporting? Like, are they being an ally, or are they speaking for this BIPOC, the community, right? So it's so, so important that you're not speaking for the community, you're giving them, you're amplifying their voice and sharing what they have to say, and just taking into account, like, I truly believe people can learn from their mistakes and change going forward. I don't believe in the whole cancel culture. I don't know if you've heard about cancel culture. So it's like, I don't know if it's like the millennials that have introduced it or Gen Z, but often if you see somebody that, you know, they made a mistake, they committed some racist act or something, they get canceled, and people just, like, it's like a way of boycotting a person, an individual, because of their actions. And I understand some areas, if there are people that just continuously try not to change and they stand for what, like, is the wrong thing, I understand that. But on the other hand, I truly believe somebody can change. So, and that starts with acknowledging that, like, your privilege and if you're wrong, and learning and trying to be better. So yeah, I mean, culture appropriation, there's a lot of things that happen in the world that people do. It's more of like accepting what is right, what is wrong. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything specific you'd like me to talk about in terms of that. I think overall, generally, that's the biggest thing, is like, in conclusion.
Right, right. So just, I think, you know, just being sensitive and really coming from a place of privilege. So my privilege is white, you know, and my challenge is woman. I mean, as a woman, I recognize that I have been oppressed. And it's interesting, you know, when you talk about who we're learning from, and because just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I haven't internalized my own oppression, right? And so when I look back on my life, I can see that a lot of situations that I just kind of accepted it. Oh, because I didn't really verbalize it. It didn't really even come to the surface. I just sort of accepted, I'm the woman, therefore this is where I'm at, and that's where they're at because they're different. And this
Mm-hmm.
is, so it's really interesting, you know, how I think we're born into wherever we're born into, and immediately the programming
Mm-hmm.
starts. And for me, as an ethical vegan, I see that as well. Like, I wasn't born a carnivore or an omnivore. I was trained, I was taught that this is what you consume to be healthy. And then I've had to sort of, unlearn and relearn as you go along. But I think it's the same with understanding other cultures. You know, I've seen that through the lens of um, people who've taught me that this is what Indigenous people are, and this is what you know, the Indian culture is. And but if I really want to understand that, I have to acknowledge when that comes up in my brain, go, oh, now wait a minute, where did that thought come from? Who planted that idea? And
Mm-hmm.
who can I talk to say, hey, is this actually correct? Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and is it, you know, and then it becomes like, I don't want to I don't, it's like admitting, okay, I'm racist, right? I was born into a racist culture. And so it's for people like me who are sensitive to that and wanting to change, then, you know, is it okay to ask you, like, okay, I want to do this, but is it racist? Or if I do that, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
are we safe doing that? Or are people just going to say, oh, you're just racist, you're just a white person, you should know that, you should know better?
Yeah, no, for sure. For me personally, like, I appreciate that. And that's what I do as well, because I'm not perfect. Like, yes, I'm a South Asian, but does not mean that I can't be racist, right? So that's the thing. What you were saying, it's like we're learning how to unlearn this, the programming that we grew up in, or we that was instilled in us. We're all unlearning the system that we grew up in. And what you said about, like, being a woman, even like, though you're white, you're a woman, there's so, it's, you know, the intersectionality of that is that the more boxes we check off, you know, being a person of color, being a woman, being a cis versus like a transgender or part of the LGBTQ community, there's all these boxes, and the more you check off, the more challenging it is. And so how do we unlearn that and create a more inclusive space? And in terms of learning and getting your facts from, I do it to, like, still, like, whenever there's some, like, a question I have that's not regarding my community, or even if it is, I ask someone part of that community, you know, as long as I know like it's not a direct attack, or I acknowledge like I'm like trying to learn, please correct me if I'm wrong or if this is racist. And most times, like, I don't think I've ever experienced anyone being offended by me asking. I think it's more like just assuming and like using like these methods, or like I think that's not like the best thing to do, is like just ask, right? And then I think people are more than happy to answer the questions and help you be and I think just unlearning the system that we were brought up in.
Right, and questioning and just being aware, I
Mm-hmm.
think being aware of everything that we're doing. And I think COVID has helped us do that. It's helped us kind of live in the moment and be conscious of what we're doing in every moment, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can extend that to our awareness of what's going on around us. Okay, well, let's see what else. So moving forward, then you have a great future, it sounds like, and your colleagues from school. I assume you've kept in touch with some of them, and so are people feeling fairly optimistic about the opening up of the film industry and their place in it?
Yeah, I think a general like comment that I've been noticing is people are really excited to go back to work. Like what we discussed in the beginning, it's getting more challenging to stay at home and keep yourself busy and like not be around people. Like I know myself, I'm a very people's person. I need like people's energy. So it's been, I know like the first couple months it was a little more challenging adjusting to this new environment, new kind of lifestyle where you're at home all the time. And it was, it gave me anxiety at first because it was not something I was used to, and then learning to adapt to it. But I think deep down, everybody's really excited to like get back into work and, be doing something, like feeling like you're doing something and being able to see like people you love. So yeah, I think people are staying positive.
All right, and we'll just move forward safely, and hopefully we don't have to go
Yeah,
back into
wear a mask.
right. Yeah. Okay, and so your podcasts are the Sustainable Act with Smiely Khurana, and you're uploading pretty much once a week. Is that right?
Yeah, once a week. I might go to every other week now, because it's really exciting because I created this podcast, this show, platform during quarantine. It was like what I was saying. The first like month, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. Like I'm a very like I need to be working. I'm a workaholic. I need to be doing some kind of project, and it was so weird not being able to have anything to do. And with my job, like I really love getting to go to work every day and talking about sustainability and how we can be better as people and do better for the planet. And going from that, doing that like what you love every day, to like sitting at home and the best thing you can do for the world is to stay home, it just didn't feel like enough for me. And so I was like, how can I continue these conversations? Like I missed having those conversations with people in the industry about how we can be better. And so that's kind of how and people have been reaching out to me for several months, asking for tips and advice on how they can go green on their sets or in their workplaces. And it's always very happy to answer those, but I felt like, okay, there's a lot of people now reaching out and they're curious, especially with all the time off. People are doing more time learning. So like, why don't I create something? And I made a video. That was my first thing. The podcast wasn't even in my mind. I made a video where I interviewed a few different industry professionals about what they're doing. And it got a lot of positive responses. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to stop here. And so then the podcast was born, where I'm now getting to connect with people around the world, talking about initiatives they're taking on to dismantle the system, to inspire change in their communities, and hopefully inspire other people. And it's been an exciting journey so far.
It's really great, and I love your video editing. I love what you did with your video. It's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the another thing about that was I realized, my background is in video and film. So like I had fun making it, but it did take a lot of time, right? And I was like, okay, well, I need a sustainable, like play on words, but I need a sustainable way of keeping this up. And I felt the podcast was definitely less work than creating videos, because you're filming, editing, having the ready and like all the effects and everything. Where podcast, you're just focusing on the audio and the content of what people are talking about, which was really important to me, not the flashy like transitions and editing. And so that's why I was like, okay, keeping in mind that I might start work soon and I might get busy again, but I don't want to stop this. Like, I want to keep these conversations going. And that's another reason, I had no experience in audio editing or like audio recording. But I had all the time in the world to learn. So yeah, that was another where I was like, okay, how can I keep this going, but not keep doing videos? Yeah. Props to
Cool.
people that make videos regularly.
Oh, I know. Video editing is huge, even sometimes audio editing. So it gives you a whole new appreciation for the work that those folks do, hey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and well, good luck with that. I hope you're able to keep it all going. And so if people want to follow you and find out what you're up to and listen to your podcast, what's the best place for them to go?
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow us on social media at the Sustainable Act. Because again, with the podcast, you can find a link in there. So we're on Apple, Spotify, Google, like wherever you listen to your podcast. You just search up the Sustainable Act with Smiely Khurana, and the Instagram, the website is more of a community that I'm working towards building and bringing people together. So like right now, we're doing takeovers every week where each week there's a different environmentalist coming on board on our Instagram stories and showing a day in their life, going zero waste. We're doing contests, we're doing just ways to get involved, sharing resources, tips, lessons. Hopefully I'll start blogging more so that people that aren't on Instagram can also be accessing this information. And so yeah, it's a great way to get involved in the community, meet other people around the world that are they have the same values as you, and listen to the episodes that feature all these inspiring people. And like you said in the introduction, like all walks of life, there's people like of all ages, different fields, different experiences that are sharing their knowledge with the world. So yeah, you can search the podcast up on any platform and have a listen, and definitely follow me, let me know what you think. And if you have anything to offer, like I would love to learn. I'm always learning. Like I'm nowhere near perfect. So yeah.
Learning is what we're here for, I think, for sure. And so what a great project. And thank you for taking the time to tell us all about it today, Smiely.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed this conversation.
All right. And good luck moving forward, hey?
Thank you. You too.